Hello, I'm Erik Waite, and this is lesson 1 in our study of Christian Worldview Apologetics. Within the study of apologetics, there are 3 basic approaches. Classical apologetics, which is based on a rationalist epistemology. Evidentialist apologetics, which is based on an empiricist rationalist epistemology. And presuppositional apologetics, which is based on a revelatory epistemology. In this course, I will present the topic of apologetics differently than what is commonly referred to as presuppositional apologetics. Without exception, every argument against presuppositional apologetics I have ever read or heard has been based on a misconception of this approach to apologetics, including those who claim to have once believed in it. What follows then are absurd strawman arguments against it and arguments for classical or evidentialist apologetics. To some extent, I think the misconceptions are due to the way in which presuppositional apologetics have been presented and the very use of the term presuppositional. Presuppositional apologetics sounds like this approach commits the error of a logical fallacy of begging the question, or in Latin is petito principii, where the conclusion of an argument is assumed as true in the first premises. This fallacy starts with the assumption of what is trying to be proved, a form of circular reasoning, because it doesn't offer any independent evidence or justification for the conclusion. It is these last 2 issues, the evidence and justification for the Christian worldview, that I will be presenting throughout this course. Now, some presuppositional apologists will try to say, well, look, every worldview is circular, so, presuppositionalism isn't any more or less circular than any other worldview. And I think they have failed to really address the issue. So, in my approach to Christian worldview apologetics, I will present a biblically justifiable approach to apologetics that uses the strength of Van Tillian apologetics without the logical fallacies, as well as classical and evidentialist apologetics, but without their incremental approach to the God of Scripture and their epistemological fallacies. And this course will consist of 8 lessons. In lesson 1, we're doing an introduction to Christian worldview apologetics. In lesson 2, we'll define apologetics. In lesson 3, we will define a worldview. In lesson 4, we'll be talking about maintaining the antithesis of worldviews. In lesson 5, we'll look at Christian worldview apologetics versus classical and evidentialist apologetics. In lesson 6, we'll be looking at Christian worldview apologetics versus philosophical syncretism. In lesson 7, we'll be looking at the Christian worldview versus pseudoscience. And in lesson 8, we'll look at the Christian worldview versus pseudo-Christian cults. Now, any course you take in seminary or Bible college is just an introduction to the topic. So I don't expect to exhaust the subject. So at the beginning of each series, I always like to provide a recommended reading list for everyone to read. Now, the following books are what I would recommend in terms of having a full-orbed scope or understanding of apologetics. I don't necessarily recommend each one of these as a methodology, but if you're going to read or respond to or critique a different view, I think you should read sources written by them. I don't get my perspective or opinion or take on any particular view, whether it's another worldview or within Christianity, a different theological perspective, from their critics. I like to understand them from those who are adherents of the system. So, a book on classical apologetics that I would recommend is by R.C. Sproul, John Gerstner, and Arthur Lindsley. Classical Apologetics, a rational defense of the Christian faith, and a critique of presuppositional apologetics. Now, I will say, I don't think R.C. Sproul and John Gerstner, who I highly recommend. I had R.C. Sproul as a professor in seminary. I'm not that familiar with Arthur Lindsley. While I highly respect them, I don't think they actually understood presuppositional apologetics, and they're sort of rationalists to the extreme. R.C. Sproul, in particular, His primary background education before going to seminary was in philosophy. And again, he's someone I owe a great debt to. He was really my introduction to the Reformed faith. He's very much a syncretist in terms of blending or reading Scripture through the lens of philosophy. When he taught through the Epistle of Hebrews, he said he didn't know who the author was. He didn't know the context or situation was, and they sort of launched into a bunch of philosophical nonsense in his what's supposed to be an exposition of the Epistle of the Hebrews. So while I highly respect him and Ligonier Ministries, I think this is part of his weakest point is in terms of apologetics. Evidentialist Apologetics. I recommend reading Norman Geisler and Ron Brooks's book, When Skeptics Ask, a Handbook on Christian Evidences, and Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Now, I think some of the material from classical apologists and from evidentialist apologists can be very useful, but I would use them more in terms of doing reductios and responding to contrary worldviews, or in simply showing the absurdity, which is a reductio, of contrary worldviews and how they misrepresent information. A lot of times in defending the faith, you're actually responding to a caricature of the Christian worldview in the Bible rather than accurate depictions of the Bible and the Christian worldview. And sometimes using evidences to shut the mouths of the critics can be very useful. They'll make false claims regarding history, archaeology, and so on and so forth. And so sometimes these resource books can be good to respond and show them the critics how they are in error. Their information is inaccurate. A lot of times things can be refuted, but opponents of the Christian worldview, particularly in universities, will keep repeating these errors, hoping that their hearers won't know that those arguments have already been refuted. Books on presuppositional apologetics. Greg Bahnsen, Van Til's Apologetic, Readings and Analysis. Greg Bahnsen, Always Ready, Directions for Defending the Faith. Greg Bahnsen, Pushing the Antithesis. John Frame, Apologetics to the Glory of God. John Frame, Cornelius Van Til, An Analysis of His Thought. And my own book, Erik, Wait, Do Not Be Deceived. This is my apologetical work in response to the various forms of gay theology. So I not only refer to their inherent contradictions, their contradictions with each other, their flawed epistemology, and their flawed exegesis of the known texts regarding the issue of same-sex acts, but also provide a background in apologetics in that book. So I highly recommend that one as well. Alrighty, I hope you enjoy this series. And if I can think of more topics other than the 8 that I've lined up in this introduction, I will add them to the series. And until next time, may the Lord richly bless you.